My parents stole my $200,000 trust fund to spoil my disabled sister, so I finally stood up for myself. I'm 19. I never thought my 18th birthday would be the day my entire life turned upside down. I had dreams, plans, a future ahead of me, all of it shattered in a single night when I found out my parents had drained my $200,000 trust fund. And for what? To feed my sister's shopping obsession. Martha, my older sister by 4 years, was born with Down syndrome. From as early as I can remember, my life revolved around her needs. My parents made sure of that. She struggled with impulse control, social cues, and patience, things that made friendships difficult. And because of that, my parents decided that I would be her social life. Any time I wanted to go out, hang with friends, or just have time to myself, they guilt-tripped me into bringing Martha along. She needs you, they'd say. You're her sister, you have to take care of her. I remember the first time I tried to go to sleepover without her. I was 12 and my best friend had invited me to her birthday party. When I told my parents it was girls only, my mother's face fell. How do you think Martha will feel when she finds out you went somewhere without her? The guilt was overwhelming. I ended up not going, and my friends stopped inviting me to things after that. At first, I didn't mind being Martha's constant companion. I loved my sister and I wanted her to feel included. But as we grew older, her behavior became more unpredictable. If she wanted something, she took it. If she got frustrated, she'd lash out, and I was expected to manage all of it. The kids in my life slowly disappeared, unwilling to deal with the chaos that came with Martha. And honestly, I couldn't blame them. High school was particularly challenging. While other teens were going to football games, having first dates, and making memories, I was at home with Martha. My parents worked long hours, claiming they needed the extra money for Martha's needs. But I later learned where that money really went. As we got older, Martha's obsession with the color pink took over our lives. It wasn't just a preference. It was an all-consuming fixation. Anything pink, she had to have it. If she saw a pink wallet, toy, or piece of clothing, she wouldn't let go. She'd throw tantrums, cry, scream, whatever it took until my parents gave in and bought it for her. It started small. 1 pink trinket a week to keep her calm, then 2, then 5. Soon, my parents were buying her entire collections of pink items just to avoid her breakdowns. Her room looked like a pink explosion had hit it. Pink bedding, pink curtains, pink furniture, pink electronics, everything had to match her obsession. The walls were lined with pink storage bins filled with clothes she never wore, accessories she never used, and items that still had their tags on. It was like a shrine to waste, but my parents kept feeding into it. I never questioned where the money came from. My parents were always buying her things, but I assumed they had it handled. I had no reason to think otherwise until my birthday. My grandparents threw a huge celebration for me, just like they had for Martha when she turned 18. The party was at their house, a beautiful colonial-style home that had hosted countless family gatherings. Everyone was there: aunts, uncles, cousins, even some family friends I hadn't seen in years. Surrounded by family, I felt genuinely happy. When my grandparents stood up to make an announcement, I thought it was just part of the celebration. Then they said the words that changed everything. As your gift, we are so happy to give you your trust fund. We set aside $200,000 for you to use for your education and future. The room erupted in applause. I was overwhelmed with gratitude. This money meant freedom, college, independence, a fresh start. I had already been accepted to several universities, including my dream school across the country. This trust fund would make those dreams possible. I hugged my grandparents, thanking them over and over, but as I looked around, I noticed something strange. My parents weren't smiling, they weren't clapping, they stood in the corner, stiff and silent, exchanging nervous glances. Something was wrong. Later that night, when we got home, my parents sat me down in our living room. The same room where they'd always lectured me about putting Martha first, about being understanding, about sacrificing for family. My dad sighed, rubbing his temples. We need to talk. Then they told me the truth. The trust fund, gone, every last cent. They had drained it to cover Martha's shopping sprees and endless therapies. When her own trust fund ran out, they turned to mine. They spent my future without even telling me, without a second thought about what it would mean for my life. I stared at them in disbelief, my mind struggling to process what I was hearing. You used my money, the money that was meant for me, for my education? We had no choice, my mother said, her voice trembling. Martha needed it. I felt the blood drain from my face. You had no choice, you always had a choice. You chose to give in to her every whim instead of setting boundaries. You chose to spend my future away like it was nothing. My father sighed. You need to understand, taking care of Martha is expensive. Her needs come first. Her needs? I choked out, my hands trembling. You mean her shopping addiction, her pink obsession, that's what you prioritized over my future? My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Sweetheart, you have so many opportunities ahead of you. You don't have Martha's struggles. You're lucky. Lucky? I laughed bitterly. You're telling me I'm lucky because you stole from me. Then they dropped the final bombshell. We always assumed you'd take care of Martha, my father admitted, his voice matter of fact, as if he was discussing the weather. We thought you'd stay close, get a job nearby, and eventually have her live with you. We're getting older and we can't do this forever. It only makes sense for you to step up. I couldn't breathe. They had never planned for me to have a future of my own. In their minds, I was nothing more than Martha's lifelong babysitter. They had never cared about my education, my dreams, or my independence. I was just a tool, a backup plan, someone to shoulder the burden when they got too tired. I snapped. You expect me to just give up my life, to sacrifice everything because you spent my trust fund without thinking twice? You don't have to make it sound so dramatic, my mom sighed. We just need you to do your part. My part? I stood up, my hands clenched. My part was to have a future, my part was to go to college and build my own life, but you stole that from me. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in their eyes. They knew they had pushed too far. Without another word, I left the room and called my grandparents. The moment I told them what happened, my grandfather was furious. They did what? I could hear my grandmother in the background, her voice sharp with anger. For the first time, I felt like someone was actually on my side. The very next day, my grandparents confronted my parents. My father tried to defend himself, talking about Martha's needs, the financial strain, and how they had no other choice. My mother begged them to understand, tears streaming down her face as she explained how difficult it was to manage Martha's demands. But my grandfather wasn't having it. His voice was steel when he said, "You had a choice. You chose to steal from your own child. You will pay back every cent." My parents panicked, backpedaling, trying to negotiate, but my grandfather laid down the law. Either you agree to repay her or we take this to court. Every penny you spent, every withdrawal you made, it's all documented. Do you really want a judge to hear how you stole your daughter's future? Faced with legal consequences, my parents caved. They signed an agreement to pay me back over the next 18 months. If they missed a single payment, we would sue. My grandfather made sure the document was legally binding, having his lawyer draw up the paperwork immediately. But the damage was done. My father was furious that I had betrayed them. In a fit of rage, he told me to get out. If you can't support this family, then you don't belong here. My mother stood by silently, tears in her eyes but making no move to defend me. I packed my bags that night and moved in with my grandparents. My heart ached for Martha, but I couldn't stay in that house anymore. The weight of years of manipulation and guilt finally lifted from my shoulders, replaced by a different kind of pain, the pain of realizing your parents never saw you as more than a means to an end. The aftermath was both better and worse than I expected. My parents began making the required payments, but they also started a smear campaign within our extended family. They told everyone how I had abandoned Martha, how I was selfish and ungrateful. Some relatives believed them, sending me disappointed messages about family obligation and sisterly duty. But others saw through it. My aunt, who had watched me give up my childhood to be Martha's companion, stood firmly by my side. She shared stories of how she'd tried to talk to my parents about their enabling behavior, about how unhealthy it was for both Martha and me. They had shut her down every time. A month after moving out, I started therapy. My grandmother insisted, saying I needed to process years of emotional manipulation. She was right. In those sessions, I began to understand how my parents had weaponized my love for my sister, using it to control me. I learned that it's possible to love someone while still maintaining boundaries. My parents still refuse to see me as anything other than the villain. They make the payments because they have to, but they've made it clear that they consider me dead to them. It hurts, but my grandmother reminds me every day that I did the right thing, that I fought for myself when no one else would. The most surprising development came 3 months after I moved out. My aunt, who works in special education, helped arrange for Martha to start a day program focused on life skills and appropriate social interaction. Without my parents enabling, she's actually making progress. She still loves pink, but she's learning to control her impulses. She even has friends in the program who share her interests. I visit her there sometimes when I know our parents won't be around. It's different now, better in some ways. We can be sisters without the weight of obligation crushing our relationship. She's learning independence, and so am I. As for me, I'm starting community college in the fall, working part-time at a local bookstore and saving every penny I can. My grandparents offered to help with tuition, but I want to do this on my own. The payments from my parents are going straight into a savings account, money for my future that no one can touch but me. Looking back, I realized that standing up to my parents was about more than just the money. It was about breaking free from a lifetime of guilt and manipulation. It was about claiming my right to exist as more than just Martha's keeper. My grandmother tells me I'm brave, but I don't feel brave. I feel tired and sad and sometimes still angry, but I also feel free. For the first time in my life, I'm living for myself. I'm making my own choices, setting my own boundaries, and building my own future. And she's right. For the first time in my life, I chose me, and I don't regret it. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what will happen when the payments are finished, when there's nothing left tying me to my parents. Will they try to reach out? Will they finally understand the damage they've done? I don't know, but I do know this: I'm done sacrificing my life to fix their mistakes. I'm done being the backup plan. I'm just beginning to write my own story, and this time I'm the main character, not just a supporting role in someone else's life.